Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. I post weekly videos right here on my YouTube channel, and this video is part 2 of our La Family Quilt Along that we've kicked off. And in this one, we're finally cutting into our fabrics. So let's get right to it. So let's get started working on the first block of the 2 blocks featured in this La Family quilt. Okay, in the previous video, we went over how much yardage you needed of each of the different prints. And so to get started with cutting and piecing some of the blocks, we are going to be working with these 3 prints. These are all from my Kinfolk fabric collection. I always include links on where you can find the fabric. So just 3 fabrics. Basically, 2 of these are darks, and this is our light. Now here are the printouts of the 2 different blocks that are featured. We're going to make this quilt be made up of a total of 20 blocks, 10 of these and 10 of these. So we're going to start off with the most basic block, which is this one. And I'll again include a link on where you can find this printable. You can print it out, and that way you can follow along with what we're doing. But if we look at the diagram of the block itself, it's pretty simple. But when you look at the diagram of what each section represents, they're all just squares. And this is what we would call a 9-patch block, because the one block itself is made up of 9 individual squares, just like this. And now, here are the cutting instructions for what you need to cut out of each fabric. You'll see that each square is going to be cut to 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches, making it a perfect square. So when you look at the square or the block itself completed, you'll see that we're cutting out 5 of the light fabrics, and they're all going to be the same size, okay, 4.5 inches square. Then we're cutting out 2 of this print for here, top and bottom. And then the other remaining 2 are the other dark fabric, which is the black with the white swirls. And if you recall from the first video, we talk about color contrast. These are 2 different darks that are all going to be next to a light. And so when we see that, whether it's this dark next to this print, or this dark next to this one, and this one, wherever we have that contrast of light and dark, it really makes the squares pop. So now for some faster and more efficient cutting, I'm going to cut out the pieces I need from all these 3 different prints at once. And so for that, we're going to need to do a little bit of math, because the cutting directions here are only telling me what I need to cut out of each fabric to make 1 block. And remember, we have 10 of these blocks featured in the quilt. So let's go ahead and do some math. This light fabric, which is featured in 5 different squares per block, is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times the 10 blocks. So of this print, I need to cut out 50. All right. Of the other remaining ones, there's only 2 of the squares featured per block. So we're just multiplying 2 by the 10 blocks that we need to make for the quilt. So 2 times 10 is 20. So I need to cut out 20 of this one, and the same thing for the other one. 2 times 10 blocks is also 20. So if you're cutting out all the pieces that you need to create all 10 identical blocks like this, you need to cut out 50 of the light, 20 of one dark fabric, and 20 of the other. And all of these squares, remember, are being put together to make a 9-patch block, and they're all going to be cut to 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. So now we'll grab the 3 prints, get my ironing board and iron. I like to press and starch the fabric flat before I start doing any cutting. So I'm just doing this the way that I normally would do it so you can see. I'll trim a little bit off the edge here just to straighten off this edge. And what I'm doing for this is lining up the fold of the fabric here with one of the straight lines on my ruler. It doesn't matter which one, I just want it to be straight. And then I'll bring it over so I can trim a little bit off this edge just to give myself a clean, straight edge to work from. All right, and now we're going to start cutting off 4.5 inch wide strips. So I'll grab a smaller ruler. And what I'm doing is measuring 4.5 inches with this one. So I'm lining up the line of 4.5 inch with this fresh cut edge. And then I bump up my second ruler to it. And that way I know that when I remove this ruler, exactly what I need to cut is left for me here with a straight edge to follow. Once you cut out all your strips, you're gonna then subcut each one of these 4.5-inch wide strips down into 4.5-inch chunks, so you'll end up with the perfect squares. So first, what we wanna do is trim off our selvage. We don't want that in our project. And I'll just flip it this way so I can just use one ruler since I'm right-handed. And then I'm measuring 4.5 inches from here to where I'm gonna cut next. And because this is doubled up, this is 2. So I can basically get 9 4.5-inch squares from each of the strips that I cut with this little bit of waste. So if we divide 50 by 9, we're gonna get a little bit more than 5.5. So that is the number of strips you need to subcut. So if I'm getting 9 from each, this is 9 from this strip, 9 I can cut from this one, from this one, from this one. So I know that I need to go back and cut out a few more strips. I have 4 cuts so far. So before I cut any more, I'm gonna return to the main yardage here and cut out 2 more 4.5-inch wide strips. And after a few cuts, you may find that this angle here, the line that you cut, this edge, starts to kind of skew a little bit. Feel free to stop and re-clean up that edge. Mine still looks pretty straight, so I'm not gonna mess with it, but we'll measure 4.5 inches and cut 2 more strips for a total of 6 strips at 4.5 inches wide. And then we'll know we have just enough to get the blocks we need from this fabric. Okay, so set this aside. And let's cut all the rest of these strips down to the squares. And once you're done cutting up your 6 strips, right, that were cut at 4.5 inches wide, you get 9 from each. So 9 squares from 6 different strips is 9 times 6, and that's going to give us a stack of 54 squares of the light fabric. We only need 50, so that way we know that we have more than what we need. Now we're going to repeat the exact same process out of the 2 other fabrics that we're using to create this block. Now to cut up the remaining 2 prints, we are going to do the same thing we did, but remember, you don't need that many. You're only going to cut out 20 squares from each of these. So we do a little bit of math. If we know we can get 9 squares from each of the 4.5-inch wide strips, let's see, we get 9 from one, 9 from another. That's going to be 9 plus 9, 18. So that tells me I need to cut at least 3 strips at 4.5 inches wide to be able to cut the 20 squares I need for my quilt. So let's smooth this out. Let's clean off this edge and start cutting 3 strips at 4.5 inches wide. And now from these 3 strips, we're going to subcut them down the same way we just did to get 9 squares from each strip. There's 9. From the next one, I'm going to do the same thing and cut the whole strip up. And so this is 18 already. 9 plus 9 is 18. We only need 2 more from this last strip. So don't feel like you have to cut it all the way. Just make 1 cut. And because it's doubled up, you're going to end up with the 2 remaining ones that you need. And that's it. 19 and 20. So here are 20 of this print, and now I'm going to cut out 20 of my 3rd print. Now, a quick recap. Of the dark fabrics, you should have 20 squares that measure 4.5 by 4.5. And then of the lighter one here, we should have 50. So have your stack side by side here. And the next step is to start assembling the block so you can visually see how it's going to come together. So there you have it. Set all those blocks aside and meet me back here next week where I'll show you my techniques, tips, and tricks on how to piece them together. So in one sitting, you're basically going to end up with half of the blocks for our La Family quilt, okay? Now, if you enjoyed this video, definitely hit it with the thumbs up below, share it across the different social media sites, and if you have any friends who are beginning quilters, this would be a great project for them to start off with. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.